Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio music production. This is lesson 2.29 and as you can see we're looking here at the arrangement timeline and here is the arrangement of my live set that I performed. I've already uploaded it to SoundCloud and pretty much what you hear is what you get. The only sort of editing I did after the fact was I went in and I would control something like the volume here at the very end. Okay, so just to be kind of safe to get it to work. You'll see that on a few of these tracks, but for the most part, like let's just pick a random parameter here. This is our mids from our DJ EQ, and all of this is just live on the fly. There was no real editing I did after the fact. All right, so I would encourage you to at least listen to the first 10 or 15 minutes of the set because you're going to notice a few things, and we'll talk about those bugs as we move forward. So let's talk about my logic in working with and setting up this set. So as I told you I was going to do, I actually used a second project, and this was my kind of prep area. And what I would do was set, the tempo to what the tempo of the track was I was bringing in, and I'd then go ahead and stretch the track like we've talked about in previous videos. From that point, I would copy the track and paste it into the mixed view here. And I actually kind of developed a more logical system for me as I went on. And really, by stretching so many tracks, I feel very, very comfortable using the stretch algorithms here inside of Bitwig Studio. And you can see I just did tons and tons of tracks in here. It could even have been more. So what I would do for some of these is, at the start especially, I'd pull out a very specific point I'd want, I'd consolidate it, and so all I would have is triggering right from the 1. And this is all well and good if you're working on like creating a mashup between multiple tracks and okay, here's a bass line that I really like, here's a little pad section that I really like. For smaller loops, that's going to be very, very helpful. Now for full tracks and doing kind of a very traditional standard mix, that was starting to hurt me because I didn't really want to have to use the cue feature too much when I was performing. So what I ended up doing, especially in the later tracks, and I kind of figured this out as time went on, was I would just leave the entire track up and just adjust my loop parameters and my start parameters. So it's very similar to what we looked at inside of Tractor, where you have your full track, you can see the waveform, and then you can set different cue points along the way. So if I just go through this track, we'll see that as I go through different points here. And from this, I know exactly what I'm doing. And so that was very, very helpful to see visually where I was. So when I was making transitions within a given track, I wouldn't do something that was too abrupt or too awkward for the listener. Another feature that I found to be very handy was the cue to loop function. So for example, let's say I want to play this back. All right, you're not going to hear any audio because I think everything is turned down to 0 right now. But if I click play, all right, you can see that we launched right from this 9 mark here, right from the 9th bar. And then we'll get into our loop and we'll be looping. Now, perhaps I just want to cue from that loop. So if I click this again, maybe I don't want to go back and start from the 9. I'd want to start from the 11. What I can do within the individual clip and in the inspector view is to select this cue to loop function. So now when I play back, we're starting on the 11 bar instead of starting at the 9. And that was very, very handy. And if you have gone through and practiced and tried to do one of these yourself, you'd probably have found that the cue to loop was doing you a whole lot of favors. The other thing I didn't touch on before was the default playback quantization. So if we go in here to our options and to our default launch quantization, by default it's set to 1 bar. And really, that's what I'd encourage you to use if you're just starting out, because it guarantees when you click play, it's going to wait for the next bar. And assuming that your start points are at 1s, so you can see I'm here at the 77, right on the 1. I'm here at the 81, the 129. All of my start markers are going to be on the 1s. And so having a 1 bar default launch quantization is very, very helpful. So if I go in here and I'm playing back, it's going to wait for the 1, and you can actually kind of track that and follow that as well if you're watching the beat counter up here. So you can see they're waiting, And same thing with the stopping as well. It's going to wait for the 1 bar. And I think for most people, that would be very handy. Of course, if you want to get a little bit fancy and you feel like your timing is really, really good, you could set the default launch quantization all the way down to 16th notes. So now if I'm playing back tracks, they're pretty much stopping and playing back instantly. You can change that for individual clips as well. If you want one to be a half bar or, whatever, 2 bars, 8 bars, you can do that and it will work no problem. We're going to talk about some of the other really cool features from the mix view and launching when we talk about like algorithmic composition in several video lectures from now. But for the most part, those were just a couple other features I thought I should show you at this point if you wanted to get a little bit fancy. And really messing with the launch quantization per clip would be something you would do again if you're kind of mashing up a lot of things very, very quickly and you're going to need things to come in on the half, on the quarter, on the eighth, as opposed to just starting right on the 1. Next feature I wanted to show you is just sort of how you want to go about laying this out. As you can see, I have a deck 1 through a deck 4, and literally I just pulled my tracks in and just kind of went in order. Now you could arrange them however you want, and we have our cue system set up from the past few videos, so you already know how that works. A couple ideas maybe is you could actually duplicate these decks out. So I could select Command D, duplicate deck 1, and what I'd probably do here is like change the colors of all of these to just like a gray or something. Well, let's just choose that color, although we're using that somewhere else. We'll choose that, and I'll go up here and change it here. And this is going to be specifically my deck 1 cue. And now what I can do is constantly have this track muted, and I can have it armed to be cued. So now if I'm playing back and I actually wanted to, I could know what I would be cueing in from the exact same deck. Similarly, I could just not have any of these other decks, and I could just duplicate out deck 1 a few times, and we could pull all of our clips and put them all onto one deck, duplicate that multiple times. So if I wanted to, I could duplicate this over. Let's just change the colors here of the first track, change it to yellow or something. And now what I could do is I could play here, and then I could select and play something else from the same track at the same time. And that is something that a lot of you maybe wanted to do and just weren't really thinking, how's the best way I could do that? Obviously, you don't have to arrange these and organize these the way I have, but for the most part, I just organize them all like this is all coming from the same track. Then I leave a space from the lowest point of my 4 decks I was working with. So in this case, deck 3 is going all the way down to scene 26. And then I'd start my next set of 4 onto scene 28. And you can see on the first clip here, I set the BPM. Some of them I renamed, all the way down for whatever reason. Doesn't really matter. It's up to you. And as I mentioned before, you could color code these specifically, but I thought that was going to be just a little bit too much work. So I didn't do that. But there would be situations where that would be super, super helpful. Now you're wondering, what do I have going on here in this audio 5? Well, this audio 5 is actually the audio from my S1 FX layer. Because if we record back, by default, it's not going to record an audio clip for us of our send effect that we created in an earlier video. But I actually want to have that ability, because if for some reason I made a huge mistake, it's going to take a lot of time for me to go into my S1 FX layer and mess with the modulation. So you can see here tons and tons of changes I made to my effects layer, and obviously the blue dots are indicating that all of these parameters have been modulated at some point. But to go back in there to find the trouble spot, to control the volume, all of that's going to be kind of tricky, and I like just printing the hard audio. So when I performed, I set up a audio track, and I just went in here and selected S1FX layer. So this is the input, and then the output was going to the master, which was totally fine. All right, and now I could control this, and it actually did come in handy because I just went in here and selected volume and yanked that down. Either way, if you're just performing live, you don't need to do that because the audio is going to come out of this Send 1 FX layer, and you won't need to worry about making any changes after the fact. But if you need to make changes after the fact, I would kind of encourage you to set a system up like that. Looking at this effect that I created, I changed some things around here. Just thought I'd show you. So I have my EQ going into my reverb, and then inside of my reverb, I actually added a feedback loop. So you can do that here, and if you select wet effects, you can put effects that specifically are going to work inside of this reverb. So I actually put a delay in here, and what that means is that my delay signal is then feeding itself back into the reverb, getting reverbed again, going out to the delay, going back into the reverb, and it's creating this complex effects loop and feedback loop, excuse me. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about how you can create a simple composition by just recording like background noise or just like a shh sound. You can make a really, really elaborate and cool composition. And one of those tools is actually utilizing a feedback loop like I've created here. And if you listen to my set, you'll hear kind of me just messing around with that at the very beginning and at the very end. I only did that because I just have a lot of fun doing that. And of course, I made my macro mappings here. And let's see if we can see what these are controlling. If I close some of this stuff down, I'm not controlling anything in there. Let's see. Hopefully you can see what this is changing. So you can see it's changing the mix parameter here in the reverb, and it's also changing my feedbacks, which I don't think we're going to be able to see. Maybe I can. I can close this down. Maybe not. Oh, it's frustrating. But basically, I had it controlling a variety of things in here, specifically the feedback. So as I would turn up my crazy verb knob, my feedback would also be going up, which is just going to make this absolutely insane. And you can see we're just getting tons and tons of audio going through here. And so I had to make a volume control and a specific control to make sure that I wasn't going absolutely mental with it. And that's also why I included a peak limiter on the end, just to be safe. So I thought I'd show you what I created. Obviously, you could create anything you want to create there. And really, that's about going to do it for this video. I did want to mention a couple of things. One is that really the way you set this up is up to you, and you don't have to go about it this way. One thing you could do is just have 2 decks playing back and just have one clip. So just have your full length track, right? Play that out to your heart's content. And then when you feel ready, you can make the switch and start, going to another track and make your mixes that way. It really doesn't matter. What we've done here is we've created kind of a Bitwig version of Tractor, only Tractor on crack, because we've created our own effects device that we want to use. We also have unlimited cue points, unlimited looping, and we can control all of that from here. And when I actually performed, I did one test where I performed using the APC40, and then I did another test where I performed clicking just on the computer, and I actually ended up just going with the clicking because I could scroll a lot easier and see my clips a lot easier, which with the APC40 just wasn't possible because when I was scrolling, it wasn't scrolling with me. So, you can get lost very, very easily. And the last point I want to make is just because you don't have a DJ-specific controller doesn't mean you can't try to do this. Make the most of what you have and be wary and like very cognizant of what you do have. So if all you have is a computer, for example, don't set yourself up to do really, really complex things. For example, if I'm just using the computer, I'm probably just going to have my 2 full-length tracks. Maybe I'd have a second point just going to where the breakdown is. And I wouldn't even control all that much on my EQs. So I'd maybe be playing this track back. All right, I'd go into deck 2. We know that the low end is kind of like the most important area we have to control. So on my deck 2, I just go ahead and mute the low end to start. All right, I'd wait 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, boom. Bring in my other tracks that we're playing in time. Go back to deck 1. Open this up. Kill the lows. Count to the count of 4. Go back into deck 2. Boom, bring it in. And just like that, I've made a transition between my 2 different low ends with just a few clicks on the keyboard. And that's all it takes. And you still have the ability to perform something back live and perform something very, very well. DJing, in my opinion, is all about track selection. If you pick the right tracks that fit together, doesn't matter if you have an $8,000 controller or just your one hand and a trackpad, you can still perform back live. It's just about knowing what it is you have access to and adapting for it. And so many people are always searching online for new controllers, new this, new that. And that's really not the problem. The problem is the way you're approaching the subject. Instead of thinking, oh man, I could do this so much better if I had this, just think, what can I do the best with what I have right now? And I want to end on that note because in my next video, we'll probably going into more philosophy and just doing a whole DJing and Bitwig wrap up. But for some of you watching this video who probably won't watch that, I just want to get in my little rant there at the end. So I do encourage you to check this out. The final mix is up to SoundCloud right now. I'll link to it, and I want you to notice a couple of things. Number one, and I keep just rambling on and on here, I do apologize for that, is there is a pretty big issue with writing automation using the EQ3, and I'll show you what I mean. So I looked at this, and I looked at the lows, and look at what happens here. We cannot really control this. It just disappears. And so if I pull this up, it is making changes, but I'm not really sure how it's making changes because this has been set into bipolar mode. And so when I'm at 0%, I assume that it means I'm right here. So I'm at the 0, but we don't have access to getting below this. And I'm not sure if you can at all. Maybe there's a way. I have no idea. I wasn't able to figure that out. So maybe somebody else has figured it out. I can't figure it out. We can look at it here and it's the same problem. So that was one glitch I encountered, and I've had glitches with the DJ EQ before. So I'm not sure if Bitwig is looking into that or not. Maybe it's just to my own system. Who knows? The other issue I had was with some clicks on some of the stretching. So if you listen back to my set and you listen to the beginning of it, you're going to hear some like clicks and some pops. And that really wasn't my fault. That was just the algorithm not being able to handle stretching within a clip. So I'm trying to think. I know this track had serious problems with that for whatever reason. So, there's not that many like markers in here, especially in the region that's playing back. But for some reason, it would just click and pop, and I couldn't really figure out why. So that was one other downfall I encountered. The last complaint I would have, and I really don't like making complaints because you have to make do with what you have. But if you map a controller to the BPM, which you can do, you can select Learn Controller Assignment, it doesn't let you map to the micro setting. So if I selected Learn Controller Assignment and then I would turn a knob, it would always jump to like 122, 121 with even the most subtle of turn. So you have to go in and do it manually, which is what I did. I would just take my hand and at certain points, bring the BPM up or down based on what was needed for the particular live set. And in case you were wondering, I only practiced, 2 or 3 times, so I only practiced maybe 2 or 3 hours, and then I just jumped in there and I did it. And I encourage you guys to do the exact same thing, have tons of fun with this. And I think if you're really focused on music creation, music production, being able to do this, and specifically the prep work, setting up, but even understanding how tracks fit and how they evolve in time is going to help you with your own productions. Thank you for listening to this, and I know I've rambled a little bit, but please go ahead, check out the set if you want, and you'll hear from me again in the next lesson. Thanks a lot, and take care.